Thank you, General. Maybe our last question for the panel from our NASA Administrator. Jim?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say, Doug, you have been a champion on this issue for a very long time. And as a former member of the House of Representatives, Mr. Vice President, you should know that we've had the opportunity to vote on what was called the Space Corps, which wasn't a full new service, but like the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy, the Space Corps would be part of the Department of the Air Force, and in that vote, we had 344 yes votes as part of the National Defense Authorization Act in the House of Representatives. Strong bipartisan support. I voted on it as a member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. I voted on it as a member of the Full Armed Services Committee. Both cases, strong bipartisan support. And then, of course, in the House of Representatives, it got 344 votes. In no small part, Doug, because of your leadership. Because you were committed, and I heard you in your testimony, I read your testimony as well. The point here is that this cannot and must not become a partisan issue. And you've been committed to that from the beginning, and I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. Finally, in your testimony, Doug, I read that one of the things that you suggest, and I've heard this before, that because there's no space doctrine, we shouldn't have a Space Force because we're not ready for it. And of course, your testimony, and you've said it verbally, is that, wait a second, we need a Space Force so we can have a space doctrine. So I think that's a very important point to make. And finally, when we think about the history here, you've mentioned Hap Arnold, of course, a critically important person in the history of the creation of the Air Force. Before him was Billy Mitchell. Billy Mitchell was a brigadier general. He became a very strong advocate for a separate, independent Air Force after World War I. He was such a strong advocate at a time when a lot of the political leadership wasn't ready. He eventually got fired. It is also true that when we started flying missions in World War II, from aircraft carriers, we had Air Force bombers on aircraft carriers. Those B-25 bombers were called the Mitchell, the B-25 Mitchell. So when you look through the history, there have been visionaries that got dismissed, and eventually they were proven correct. And Doug, I think you're one of those people, and I just want to make sure that's on the record.
Sir, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to work with you over these years on this important topic. And I need to say two things. First, I need to talk about Captain Paul Beck. Nobody here has ever heard of Captain Paul Beck, but Captain Paul Beck was actually the first advocate for a separate Air Force. In 1913, he was the only uniformed member of the Air Service going ahead and testifying for it at a time when Billy Mitchell, Hap Arnold, and Benjamin Follet testified against it. You've never heard of Captain Paul Beck because he was caught in a liaison with the wife of the Supreme Court Justice of Oklahoma and was shot. So I hope I do not meet that fate. But to your point, doctrine is just about everything. Doctrine dictates what we buy, how we train, how we plan, how we go ahead and develop our space forces. Today we don't have a space doctrine because doctrine is developed by domain services. Now, it's untrue to say there's not a document called space doctrine. The land doctrine is developed by the Army, naval doctrine is developed by the Navy, air doctrine by the Air Force, but our space doctrine is developed by the Joint Staff. And it's more a command and control relationship document than a doctrine of how we fight. People have asked for decades, who's the Mahan for space? Who's the Clausewitz for space? We have no answer. We are not going to get there without a service that goes ahead and promulgates and promotes those people who can think in that way. Thank you.
Well, I want to invite everyone to thank this extraordinary panel for their contributions to this meeting and their contributions to the life of the nation. Thank you very much. Well done. With that, we're going to open the floor for a discussion about the United States Space Force and the recommendations that will be proposed for the President at the close of this meeting. I'm going to ask the members of the National Space Council to approve those proposals shortly, but the public should know that members of this council have been deeply involved in interagency discussions regarding the Space Force, and several have asked for the opportunity to provide public remarks at this time. So in the interest of transparency and keeping the public fully informed about this process, I wanted to make sure several of our members had an opportunity. I would say to all the members, if you want to submit written remarks for the record for public inspection as well, you're entitled to do that. Let me begin with Deputy Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan, and again, thank you, Patrick, for your great leadership at the Pentagon in moving President Trump's vision for a Space Force forward.
Good. Thank you, sir. It's great to be here with all of you, and I'd have to say we've come a long way since our inaugural Space Council meeting a year ago. And before making some remarks, I thought I'd give out a few thank yous. So, Mr. Vice President, thank you for your leadership, for your drive, and for your impatience. We have to go fast. Sue, thank you for your working together spirit and forward thinking. Secretary Wilson, I greatly appreciate your teamwork and your commitment to getting things right. General Silva, I can't think of a better partner. Your expertise and focus on the warfighter and technical prowess is unmatched. Dr. Scott Pace, I appreciate you making sure there is no daylight between our operations. And there's Russ. Russ, thank you for your fiscal stewardship. It's always helpful to restate.
That's a great list. I'd like to join you. Well said.
Thank you. It's always helpful to restate the reason we are here. The U.S. military is the best in the world in space, but our adversaries have taken note and are actively developing and fielding capabilities to potentially deny our usage of space in crisis or war. At the same time, commercial space industry has moved forward in ways never imagined. President Trump has directed that a response to the threats from adversaries and the opportunities of commercial space be combined to generate a solution, the Space Force. The creation of the Space Force is no easy task, as I've come to learn firsthand. Mr. Vice President, we're moving out. We owe, thank you. We owe a legislative proposal in the coming weeks. That's a significant lift. The legislative proposal will embody our guiding principles: speed and effectiveness. Speed in leveraging commercial space technology and resources. Speed in escaping red tape. Speed in fielding capability sooner. It will reflect our drive to be more effective. Effective in maximizing how we are more integrated technically to unlock our ability to be united in our space operations. Effective in creating a solution, and then together, not singularly, leveraging the solutions across the enterprise. Effective in how we structure the Space Force. Cost is not an independent variable. We must demonstrate prudence and create value. Our most pressing focus is the construction of the Space Development Agency. We are defining the statement of work, the resources, the mix of talent, and many other critical attributes. The Space Development Agency will leverage technology, standards, and architecture to enable unparalleled integration. The technical foundation must be provisioned for growth and new missions. The effort now is on reconciling capabilities prioritized by the National Defense Strategy with the readiness of technology, anchored by our assumptions on how quickly we can scale. Very, very smart technical leaders are focused on this effort. This will lead to a budget proposal outlining both how we will stand up the Space Force and what new warfighting capabilities we need to ensure our dominance in space. In conclusion, Mr. Vice President, I appreciate your steady hand in driving the President's vision into reality. The Department of Defense is moving out. Thank you.
With that, the chair recognizes the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, a woman that the President and I have come to respect so greatly for her role in the life of the nation, for her steady counsel. Join me in thanking Sue Gordon for her great leadership and presence here today.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for your steady leadership of the Council and for your work to elevate American preeminence in space as a national priority. I am absolutely delighted to be here representing the women and men of the intelligence community, and I'm honored to be in the presence of such distinguished colleagues who share in this vital quest. And to Doug, Mark, and Kevin, to have your voices lent to this endeavor gives me great confidence, so thank you very much. The intelligence community applauds the redoubled emphasis on ensuring and protecting our strategic advantage in this domain that is so necessary to our national interests. But it's a strategic advantage that our adversaries and competitors would seek to diminish. We assess that Russia and China continue to focus on establishing operational forces designed to attack United States space systems. Space is a priority warfighting domain for them, as demonstrated by the creation of dedicated military space organizations over the past several years. Russian and Chinese destructive anti-satellite weapons will probably reach initial operating capability in the next few years. And both these countries are advancing directed energy weapons technologies for the purpose of fielding anti-satellite weapons that could blind or damage or are sensitive space-based optical sensors, such as those used for remote sensing or missile defense. And in addition, Russia and China continue to launch experimental satellites that conduct sophisticated on-orbit activities, at least some of which are intended to advance counter-space capabilities. If a future conflict were to occur involving Russia or China, either country would probably justify attacks against U.S. and allied satellites as necessary to offset any perceived U.S. military advantage derived from military, civil, or commercial space systems. Now, President Trump's national strategy for space recognizes that our competitors and adversaries have turned space into a warfighting domain. The development of a Space Force is necessary to counter these adversarial actions that would deny the President's objective, which is simply that the United States must maintain its leadership, its preeminence, and freedom of action in space. I want to assure the Space Council members and the public that in the face of emerging threats, the intelligence community and the Department of Defense have not been idle. We are not well designed for waiting. Together, we have created common mechanisms for collaboration that have greatly improved unity of effort and have vastly improved our effectiveness in space. More, I'm working closely with the Deputy Secretary Shanahan and Vice Chairman Selva to ensure that the intelligence community and the department are even better positioned and aligned as we move forward for delivering outcome. Simply put, the intelligence community is leading in the development of the Space Force and building aggressively on our storied past. The President's national strategy for space requires the intelligence community to work hand in glove with the DoD on 4 key areas that are vital to the mission of the Space Force. First, we are jointly working to accelerate the transformation of our space architecture to enhance resiliency, defenses, and responsiveness to mission needs. Second, we are working to strengthen our deterrence and warfighting options. The intelligence community is pursuing with the Department of Defense ways to strengthen U.S. and allied efforts to deter potential adversaries from extending conflict into space. And if deterrence fails, to counter threats used by those adversaries for hostile actions. Third, we are working to improve our foundational capabilities, structures, and processes. I've directed elements of the intelligence community to work with the Air Force and the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering and other key Space Force stakeholders to accelerate collaboration on the development of cutting-edge capabilities that will ensure effective space operations through improved situational awareness, intelligence, and acquisition processes. And finally, we are directly supporting the space warfighter by providing unique, actionable intelligence, and by having our analysts and operators co-located with the Joint Space Command Component Commander, where they share the floor to make sure that we act as one. This allows us to jointly test new approaches to space operations, and when those operations demonstrate merit, we will work to jointly field new capabilities. Mr. Vice President, members of the Council, since 1961, the intelligence community has been invested in space, supporting exploration, reconnaissance, and defense in, from, and through this domain. I appreciate the opportunity to describe how the intelligence community is working to advance the establishment of the Space Force and the opportunity it provides. I look forward to updating the Council as our work progresses. Now, let us be up and doing. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your energetic collaboration on this effort between defense and the intelligence community. You have most certainly, as evidenced by both of your remarks today, you've certainly not been idle and are both moving out. And the President, I know, is very grateful. With that, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who's also brought an extraordinary amount of visionary energy to this effort, General Paul Selva, thank you so much, and the Chair recognizes you for your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you for your leadership and the leadership of the Council. To all of my colleagues, this has been a team effort. To the Deputy Secretary and the Principal Deputy Director, thank you for your collegial work in this space, as well as the Secretary of the Air Force for her leadership in trying to get the organization right. General Dunford regrets that he can't be here today, but I will make just a very brief comment in his stead. The Joint Chiefs are unanimous in their support for the stand-up of a combatant command for space to focus our activities and our development of doctrine, tactics, techniques, procedures, and more importantly, to discuss the authorities, responsibilities, and rules of engagement for conduct in space, for the conduct of defensive and offensive operations, to protect our constellation, to fight our constellation, and to support our warfighters in all domains and across all domains as we protect our ability to deploy civil, commercial, and military space to the benefit of the nation. And with that, Mr. Vice President, I will yield any time that's available to the balance of my colleagues on the Council.
With your, thank you, General. Thank you for your characteristic brevity, but also thank you for your tremendous collaboration on this in your position with the Air Force and as Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I'm always pleased to see the Chairman present for these occasions, but especially so for you to be here today. Thank you for your energetic efforts on behalf of this effort and on behalf of the American people. With that, the Chair recognizes Colonel Andrea Thompson, who is the Under-Secretary of State for the Department of State and an alumni of the Vice President's office. So we're so pleased to see you taking a leading role in the State Department on behalf of the Secretary. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for the opportunity to serve with you and to continue to serve. It's a great honor to be able to represent Secretary Pompeo and the women and men of the State Department. Much like my partner in crime across the way with General Selva, I'll keep my remarks brief. We'll submit the statement for the record, but
Without
just
objection.
very briefly, as we meet today, I think it's important to note that American diplomats are up in New York at the United Nations, engaging in discussions on space security issues and on cooperation on the peaceful use of space. They're working hard to implement the President's guidance and help, as you have said, Mr. Vice President, to ensure that our most cherished values and ideals are at the foundation of the future of boundless, expansive space. In these and in other international engagements, U.S. diplomacy continues to play its role in upholding our vital interests in space, to ensure unfettered access to and freedom to operate in space in order to advance America's security, economic prosperity, and scientific knowledge. And of course, as both you and the President have said, America first does not mean America alone. Therefore, the Department of State actively seeks constructive partnerships with our spacefaring nations that share our goals of strengthening the safety, the stability, and sustainability of their and our space activities. At the same time, as my DNI counterpart, as Sue mentioned, at the same time, we must recognize that our competitors and adversaries have turned space into a warfighting domain. And the Department of State fully supports the President's proposal to establish a Space Force, as well as other reforms necessary to meet our U.S. national security objectives in light of existing and advancing threats, while maintaining the existing international laws and norms that we spoke of today that have supported American preeminence in space for decades. It's a great honor, and I look forward to continued success with this team. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much.